I'd like to welcome everybody to Art Presence in Jacksonville. And I can't wait for this. It's going to be really fun to hear all about the book, my year in my life at Good Bean Cafe.
Here at the Good Bean.
Talk of the Town is an event we do here at Art Presence that brings in people from around the area who have interesting things to say. We have winemakers and cheesemakers and authors all come in and tell us a little bit.
Okay.
And so we're happy to have a couple of authors tonight.
Okay. By the way, the camera is here because this is being recorded for Gene to put on his website and whatever he wants to do. So that's why the microphone is here. It's not because you can't hear in this little room, but it's for that. If you don't know me, I'm Frank Deluca, and I've known Gene for some years as a fellow author, and he gave me an opportunity and said, would you like to do an evening with me around my book, and you can interview me, right? Is that kind of how it came?
That's it. I saw you be interviewed. By Eileen from Rebel Heart.
Yeah.
And I knew that you were the person who could make it happen and, pick me up when I fell.
How are you doing so far?
Well,
Buckle your seatbelt. Well, it's great. Some of you were there. Eileen Bobeck of Rebel Heart Books. Instead of doing an author talk, we did an interview back in June, and it was fun. It was a lot of fun. So I'm glad to do this, and this is about you tonight. I have to admit up front, I have fiction writer envy, because what I've written is more psychological and things like this, and Gene gets to just fly, right? And he has an imagination, and fiction writing always just stumps me. Because how do you come up with this stuff? And how do you create these great descriptions and these scenes? And so I just always think, wow. So I look at him and go, how do you do that? So I'm really happy to be here with you. So thanks to Art Presence to creating this kind of format for people, because I know this includes, yes, it could be winemakers, but especially here through Art Presence, artists, poets, authors, and Gene is all three of those, if not more. You say, we'll let you go as definitely an author and an artist and a poet. Can we say that?
And other things we
and
want
other
to
things.
talk about.
All right, we'll just keep to those three for now. The others may show up anyway tonight. So how many of you know Gene? Three. Okay, this side of the room. And this side of the room knew. All right, well, very good. And how many of you have read his book or other books of Gene? So good. Okay, so that's 4 out of 6. That's pretty good, Gene. So for some of you, this is all new, and this is not. Gene's books are Wet Tales, Penitentiary Tales, Inside the Mind of Martin Mueller, the Book of Chuck, which I'm not familiar with. That was your first, yeah. But so I started reading Gene's work, I don't know, 3 years ago or 4, something like that, and I was pretty intrigued, and so I've been following him. And fortunately, he was able to let me get a preview of some of the stories in this book beforehand, and then I watched how this evolved into a novel and not just stories, So I decided I didn't decide, it just happened that I wrote a few things as an opening, and then we'll turn it over to you. But I just want to say this. So Gene's latest book, My Year at the Good Bean, starts off in a place we're all familiar with, in a town we're all familiar with. But that's just the starting point. We might say it's about the Good Bean in Jacksonville. Oh, I've been to the Good Bean. Oh yeah, I know that place. I meet up with people there. I go for coffee. I see everybody there. I see groups of people. I see individuals. Yeah, I know that. Oh, in Jacksonville. Who doesn't love Jacksonville? And we all know that Jacksonville is a great place to live, really sweet people. It's great. But that's the familiar part, and that's maybe the last of what's familiar to us about Gene's book. He starts off really safe. It's like, here we are, the Good Bean, Jacksonville, and his wonderful mind takes us from there. So this is truly a local author writing about this very place. But where he takes us is not necessarily local. Or is it? I don't know.
No, I like to think the themes are universal, and there are many Jacksonvilles on the planet.
Exactly. That's what I found.
It's a center that attracts certain kind of people, and it attracted me, got me here, got you here, and made this evening possible.
How many people have a Jacksonville story of how you got here that was inexplicable or unexpected? I mean, I think a number of us on this side of the room, but you see it's happening.
Unplanned and unforeseen.
Unplanned and unforeseen.
And something came about, events just transpired, and at the end of that chain, here you are. Most people don't deliberately, consciously trace it back. They're just here, and now they're doing what they're doing. But it's intriguing to see that there are similarities between everyone's path and how they got here and why. And that is, partially the theme of the book, how people came here, why they came here, what they're doing here. And maybe I've answered that question for a few people who've never asked that question. I've traced it back for myself, so I know the story of how I got here. In the book, I don't take real people and take their story and verbatim reveal it. I create fictional characters and imagine who are here. The book consists of 12 individual stories, but they comprise a novel because there's like an overarching narrative. And each of the stories has its own character. And every one of those characters came here somehow for some reason. And so I explore that in each case. And in every case there are certain inexplicable events, surprising, unforeseen events that caused them to end up here. So it's a stretch from reality, and hopefully that makes it interesting.
Well, you mentioned you touched on something I think really key, because it helped me to understand in a way how to read Gene's work, because you write in a genre or close to what might be called magical realism. Can you give us your short answer to what is the genre of magical realism, and who are other authors like that, and how you see it? Mm-hmm.
Well, basically, magical realism, the principle is that unlikely events, implausible events, maybe impossible events, occur in the story, and nobody thinks twice. You just take it for granted that it's part of the reality within the story itself.
Can you give us an example?
Yes, Gabriel Garcia Marquez.
Anyone read any of his? That was my first introduction to this genre, 100 Years of
Colombian
Solitude.
writer, and that's what he does. 100 Years of Solitude is his big book. He won the Nobel Prize. First story I came across was called A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings. And in that story, there's a village in Colombia, rural village in Colombia, and they were going about their business. And one day, a very large and very old and very dirty, dirty man with enormous wings falls from the sky and lands in their midst. And so it's not like anyone sitting around going, how is this possible? How can there be a man with wings? How could he fall from the sky? No one questions it. That's magical realism. They put him in a cage and he sits in the cage, and then his presence affects their lives going forward.
Well, it reminds me of one of your stories because there's a similar
Yes.
event in that. This is what the title is called: "The Man Who Fell."
The body that fell from the sky. Yes.
Don't tell us the whole story, but the basic thing is, well, just you set it up.
Well,
for us.
okay, very briefly, imagine that you're driving in the southwest in the desert across southern Arizona, and it's a blue sky, and it's bright, not a cloud in the sky, and you see a little speck in the sky, and you think, well, it's probably a bird winging its way back somewhere. That as you look at it, it gets larger and larger, and then you can see it's kind of twirling, and before you can say the word body, it bounces off your windshield and careens off the side of the road and gets impaled on a saguaro cactus. I had that image in my mind for probably a couple of years.
Mm.
I had no idea what the story would be, but I kept asking myself, well, if that happened, who, what, when, where, how? And so that's one of the stories. And when I sat down to write it, I had no idea. But by the time you get to the end of the story, when you read it, then you still won't have any idea. But
Sure, but it was a great story. Yeah. Well, can I ask you, because this is, I think, a key thing in trying to understand how you write my envy, because I think you're telling before that sometimes you have that image, and then you have to make up the story, and you kind of reverse engineer this whole thing about how did this happen, what's the story around this, and you create a whole beautiful story around this thing and who this person was and how it happened right here and the coincidence of people who were together and so forth. But as I've said, I don't think it's just your imagination. It seems like there's something else at work in the way that you write, where you're kind of open to these possibilities that come to you. It isn't that you sit there, because he actually wrote this at the Good Bean, you know. He sat there every morning, at 6 o'clock to noon?
6 till noon, unless I had something else to do, but generally.
And he's a character in the book in a way. Well, I won't get. Yeah, you are. And but anyway, but it's not just that you sit there and make them up. Can you tell us a little bit about how this creative process works for you? And
Well, the way the book came about, it was not intended to be a novel at all. I'd written a previous novel, Penitentiary Tales, and I hadn't written anything else for a year because I was spending that year marketing that book, and now it was time to write a new novel. And since I hadn't written for quite some time, I just wanted to tune up, get my groove back. And so I thought, okay, well, I'm going to write a few short stories. I may send them off to have them published, maybe not. This is just, to exercise, grease the wheels. And I had a list of about a dozen titles of
that
short
was it, yeah.
stories. And that's, kind of speaks to how I might write a short story. A title will occur to me.
Yeah.
I have no idea what story it's going to be, but I'll make a list. I have a file of titles, just titles. And so I sat down and go, okay, I'm going to write a few short stories. And then I thought, well, why not write a collection? Authors, once they're established anyway, they write a collection. And so I looked at all the titles and I saw that they all had kind of something in common. And that was the unusual events, like the body that fell from the sky was one of the titles. And so, okay, well, that's what I'm going to do. So I chose, a dozen. That's a nice number for a collection. So I chose a dozen titles. And I began with The Body That Fell from the Sky was the first one that I wrote. And then you ask yourself, well, you proceed by weaving a story around that incident. So I'm writing that story, and I'm writing another one, then I'm writing another one, and I'm moving along, and I'm starting to see how these stories have something in common beyond what I had imagined. And it started to occur to me that while each of the stories has its own separate narrative, its own plot and its character, etc., there seems to be something going on, such that there is like an overarching narrative. And where it comes from, suddenly I'm pulled back, and I see myself sitting in the Good Bean Cafe writing stories. And that has nothing to do with each of those individual stories. It starts to become its own story. I see a writer sitting in the Good Bean Cafe, and then I ask, well, what is he doing? Why is he doing it? And then I go, what we have here is a novel. A novel about a person who is sitting down with the intention of writing a dozen stories into a collection, and that's the story. And all of these are little embedded stories in the greater narrative. And what was the question?
It doesn't matter, because this is great stuff. Well, let me come in and comment, because I love what I hear. The creative process. Some of you in this room, we have one official artist I know, and probably more. Okay, a few. But in talking to Gene, I realized he's in his own creative process, but there's a universal qualities to this creative process.
Yeah, it's so familiar. When I
Yes.
was listening to you, I think about creating art and how sometimes I do start with a story. And
But are you a painter?
yes, a visual artist, and so and then I let that come out on the paper, or But it's so interesting to, and I love the idea of the titles. Oh my gosh!
I know.
Coming up with some titles, because I usually title my paintings after.
Yes.
But coming up with titles in the beginning.
And letting them incubate
then,
maybe for years.
Yes, I love that. I'm going to use that.
Perfect. Well, that's what I'm so glad.
What?
See?
Yeah.
Well, this is a creative process, which is I really wanted Gene to talk about, because it's not everyone does it this way, but my experience has been that as well. You don't know when you start where this is going, and it's not just your imagination. But many people I know who write novels say these characters show up. I never met them before. Then I have to figure out where they go, and they begin to tell me what to do.
Exactly.
Is that what your experience
yes,
is?
you have to, you might create a character for, an impulse. You have a character and you give him or her a name and put him in a situation. You drop him down into a setting and then give him a challenge or give him some conflict that's going on. And so basically now you've done your work, because they're going to take over and they're going to become, pretty soon they're going to be telling you who they are, what they think, what they're doing, what they want, what their problems are. And you just have to back off and let them go and just record what you see or what you hear.
I just got to interrupt. That's normal to you, you see, but that is normal to other mortals, that you just are so relaxed and going, okay, here you are. I'll listen. I'll just take dictation. But there's something about tapping into that level of creativity that I think is part of what gives your work so much power, because there's a free flow of something happening here. I don't get a sense these are contrived stories.
No, I've concluded that The better you get, the less credit you get.
Ah,
Because really all you can do is start the process, and then if you want it to be fresh and original and meaningful and instructive, or what you have to do at that point is get out of the way, because now you have these creative forces that you're channeling, and all you can do is sit back and observe and record. But that's not enough. I mean, that's crazy, but that's not enough to write a novel or even a short story or a painting, because you have so much of this mystical energy rushing through you. It's like chaos. And that's not going to work for readers or your audience. It has to be constructed and crafted and shaped. So now your job is to impose order on chaos. And that's where the craft of creating a story comes from. But, if you're aware of the craft elements, you can write a story that's not art. But if you want your story to elevate to the level of art, then you have to allow that frenzied energy to come through, and then your job is just to shape it. And it took me a while to learn that concept and how to do it, because I would always try to I would read all these books on writing fiction. Oh, you got to do this, you got to do this, and I would try to do that. Create dialogue, and he's got to say this, and they got to say that, and it was pretty dreary stuff in the beginning when you're learning your craft. But you have to learn to just let go and realize that you're just participating in the creative process.
Yeah.
It's like a privilege, and so you have to respect higher power, whatever an intelligence that's not your own, that's feeding you stuff, and now you're responsible just for shepherding it into some art that other people will enjoy. So it's awesome.
it's a beautiful way to articulate this, 'cause not many people can articulate that process, and it's like an open boundary, and that's one of the things I see in your writing is that, you start with real people, it seems. These could be people who come into the Good Bean. Like the first one about the chef who would come in at 7 o'clock, and a story gets created around this person who is real or not real. Is there constant tease in there? Is this a real person? Is that me in here? There's even a Dominic Deluca, for Christ's sake, in there. But, so you start to see these little pieces of who it could be, but we never know. But the idea of this, the boundaries being thin, as I said, between the real and the unreal. Because you really blur the lines between the real and the surreal, the here and there. You're talking about another plane. Between the past, the present, and the future. It all collapses into one in a lot of your stories, where, wait, didn't this just that happen before? Oh no, it's happening in the future. Oh wait, we're having past and present all at the same time. This is the part of the magical realism. And also blurring the line between the living and the dead.
Living in the what?
The living and the dead. There are times when there's
yes.
remember so there are times when someone is dead. Well, isn't she? But she's speaking right now to her husband. But did she die? So this kind of blurring is really, I think, a big part. And also the blurring between the dark and the light aspects of humans. Because there's some wonderful, engaging stories, and there's some that really
That are dark.
walk on the dark side about human nature. And you're very free about that, very fearless. And also between ordinary states of consciousness and non-ordinary states of consciousness. Is this happening, or is this in my head? Is this drug-induced? Is this just by imagination? What plane are we on right now? And so I see that one thing you're really good at is that you those boundaries disappear. between all these usual divisions, real and unreal, and you kind of masterfully take us on journeys that are unlikely and inexplicable. You say in the opening, I know you may want to read this, but just that first sentence, dear reader, this is the opening, okay, the prologue. Dear reader, you should know up front with whom you'll be spending the next few hundred pages, exploring the nature of unlikely and inexplicable events and how they affect our lives.
And I'd be happy to.
Why don't
to-
you continue
to
with
read
that? I think it's a
Um,
wonderful opening, because even from the opening, I'm not sure if he's really talking to me as the author, or is he starting to mess with my head? You know, from the very beginning, you're already in that kind of magical realism. So go ahead and read us a little bit more of that opening.
Right. Let me see that. The way the book is structured, there are 12 stories, one for each month of the year. And the fictional author, not me, has decided that he's going to sit at the Good Bean and write one story per month for a year. And well, I have created the fictional author and have named him Adrian. And he is one of 3 characters
That's important.
who appear in every story, but they do not appear in any of the stories. And I'll make that clear. Every story has a protagonist or a central character, and it's their story. And that story may or may not be fictional, may not be real, but they are all fictional. So I have created a fictional author named Adrian. And Adrian says, dear reader, you should know up front with whom you'll be spending the next few hundred pages exploring the nature of unlikely and inexplicable events and how they affect our lives. Adrian Lomachenko here, to whom unlikely and inexplicable events have occurred with such frequency that they have come to be expected. I sometimes spend days on end doing nothing but waiting for something strange to happen. I'm rarely disappointed. The first such event occurred to my 5-year-old self. I was sleeping alone in my own bed, in my own bedroom for the first time, having spent the entirety of my young life in the same bedroom as my parents. They had tucked me in and said good night. You'll be fine, they assured me, but I was not convinced. Alone with my stuffed monkey Miranda, I closed my eyes against the writhing water stains on the disintegrating wallpaper and my ears against the tiny voices that came from behind the closet door. I chewed on my monkey's left ear, having long since chewed off the right. When I opened my eyes, the room was bathed in a soft blue light. A man sat on the edge of the bed. He looked at me and smiled. I felt safe in his presence. Hello, he said. Hello, I said. What's your name? He said. Adrian, I said. Well, that's a very nice name, Adrian, he said. And what's your name? I said. Well, I'm Adrian too, he said. We have the same name. My young mind was perplexed. How could there be 2 Adrians? What's your monkey's name? The man said. Miranda, I said. Miranda, very nice. Why did you name her Miranda, Adrian? She told me her name. Did she now? He looked around the room. So, this is your room, huh? Yes. It's a very nice room, Adrian. You're a lucky boy. You'll be happy here. You and Miranda. You should sleep now. I closed my eyes. He touched my face with his fingers. I fell fast asleep. 20 years later, I had a dream. I sat on the edge of a small bed in a small room bathed in soft blue light. In the bed was a child holding a stuffed monkey. He was afraid to sleep alone, and I reassured him. When I woke up, I remembered the conversation in my dream, and I remembered the incident from my childhood, and I realized they were one and the same. So, that is the beginning of the unlikely and inexplicable events that occur to the person who became Adrian, the author. Then he will talk about where he was born and raised and how he was introduced to art, and he didn't know if he'd be an artist or if he'd be a writer, but he grew up in such poverty in this town of Chicken Ranch, Arkansas, where scarcity was the rule. Little money, nothing to do, and he determined to become. He got a scholarship to Berkeley and majored in finance because he wanted to make money. And so he graduates and he goes to, he's in San Francisco, and he gets a high-paying job in the financial district in finance, in business, and he's doing very great. And I had an office with a view on California Street, my own parking space, a prized piece of real estate in San Francisco. I wore a tailored suit. I carried a briefcase crammed with other people's important documents. I had a girlfriend who studied real estate law and wanted us to become wealthy together, and I was miserable. The restless, demanding forces of creativity, long repressed, rose up to challenge the cynical forces of acquisition and greed, and I was torn between them. Here I was in the West Coast literary mecca of the world, and I wore a suit. So,
And how about the encounter that you had then?
yes, then another strange and inexplicable experience occurs to him, and it's quite bizarre, and I won't get into it. But as a result, boom, he quit his job and totally changed his life, and was accepted into an MFA.
But can you just mention what happened on the streets and the encounter?
Okay.
Just summarize, because this is where he takes you. It's like, oh, I understand this. You had financial district, the suit, get the whole thing. This is real. I get it. And then
I can certainly read that.
just a few lines of it, because I think it's beautiful.
Well,
Or tell
how
us.
about a few paragraphs?
Yeah.
Okay. Some events are so unlikely and inexplicable, your life does an about-face and you go to where you are truly bound. I skipped the morning meeting at the office and took Uber to City Lights Books in North Beach. When I die, friend, spread my ashes down its labyrinthine aisles. I wandered them for an hour, and such was my habit, filled my basket with more books than I would find time to read. I would be missed at the office, but I didn't care. I stood on the corner of Broadway and Columbus Avenue awaiting my ride back to the financial district. At my side stood a tall man in a yellow silk shirt with puff sleeves over baggy crimson trousers tied at the ankles. His long black hair was parted in the middle. Golden hoops hung from his ears. He carried an umbrella, though there wasn't a cloud in the sky. The white flashing pedestrian sign cycled through twice, but he didn't cross. He turned and looked down upon me from his height. His eyes were dark pools with points of light at their centers, like the light at the end of a tunnel. A cunning smile curled his lips. "Good morning, brother," he said. His voice was resonant, seeming to come from far away after a long journey. "Same to you, friend," I said. I felt an inexplicable kinship with the man, his eccentric appearance so contrasted with mine that I was sorely reminded of the sacrifice of personal freedom that the pursuit of material gain demanded. "How was your day?" he inquired. "There are things I'd rather be doing," I confessed. He nodded shrewdly. "Don't wait too long," he said. "Tomorrow never comes." With that, he turned and stepped off the curb into the path of a cable car. He somersaulted through the air like a red and yellow beanbag and was impaled on the iron footpeg of a telephone pole. His arms hung limply at his side. One hand yet held his umbrella. Before he closed his eyes, he winked and smiled his canny smile at me. I swear he did.
That,
Okay, and then here, I quit the bank, I took a part-time job in an oyster bar.
I love that scene. You get the whole thing. Okay, he was just crossing the street or about to, and this person appears, delivers the message, and then goes in front of a cable car. And so, to me, that's a really good example. That's even Adrian speaking, the writer of this. We haven't even gotten into the stories, but I think that's a good
Right.
example of how the theme and the kind of quality of these stories. I wanted to see if there's a couple other things you can focus on for us because, I was curious about, because you have this, I talked about these no boundaries between these different planes of existence. And it's in the book that one of the characters speaks this story, but I believe you said it's actually your own, about being a child and being given the World Book encyclopedias, and you went somewhere specific. This is kind of how you know you're destined for something. Where did you go in the World Book encyclopedia when you were how old?
I might have been 8, and this is like a real story.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Very good. You're catching on.
Yes.
Oh no, this is like my. No, when I was very young, there were a lot of kids, and we didn't have a lot of money, and so we didn't get much. But one day, if you go way back 50, 60 years, and some of you probably are familiar with that era, there were traveling salesmen who sold Britannica and World Book Encyclopedia door to door. And so someone came to our door and offering to sell World Book Encyclopedia. And amazingly, my dad bought it. And here it was, and it's like 20 or so volumes, and they're white, and you get a stand with them. And I went straight to the art section, and I discovered the surrealists. Here's Salvador Dali and Max
That's where
Ernst.
he went.
All these people, and it's like my little mind, and I'm seeing all these images, and so that had a profound effect on the rest of my life. Well, anyway, that's.
Thank you.
there's
I
that.
mean, I was struck by that story because, we don't know what we come in with in this life and what we'll be drawn to, but of all the things you could have gone to in that set of encyclopedias, that's where you went. And it seems to me it was kind of telling you already, this is where my attention wants to go. And here you are, this painting, the book, and maybe we can talk about this and close soon. But and also because the fact that I said to you in the beginning, you are a painter as well as an author.
Oh, well, that's another story.
Okay, but that this painting came after you were writing, or while you were writing the stories, and this painting became then a part of a story. And the painting informed the story, and the story informed the painting. Did you want to mention something about that? That's it. That's the last story, number 12.
Yeah, that when I was in high school, I decided to paint, to do some oil painting, and I did some, and then high school is just about over, and life is just like crashing in on you, and you don't have time to sit back in a studio and paint. You got so much to deal with, and I had done a few paintings, and I had one in mind, and it was called a dumb title, a long one. Back Down Yesterday's Alleys of the Mind.
You started young.
Yeah, and I saw it as an alley with various unrecognizable objects along the way, which represented your past. And I thought, I really ought to paint that. But then stuff happened. I kept it in mind. I was 21, so we're talking about,
A while ago.
yeah, more than half a century ago. But now here it is, and I'm writing this story. And sometimes when you're writing it, you take a little break from it. And I go, this might be the time to do that painting.
I didn't realize that part. So it was from when you were 21 to when you were writing this story that painting finally came to be.
That's right. I did no other painting, no other art in that entire interim,
Wow.
55 years. And so I go, okay, I'm going to do a painting. Why not do that one? I don't know what it's going to look like, et cetera, except that it's going to be an alley. And I went online and I looked up alleys on the internet. And man, there are just like hundreds of images of alleys that people post. And I started seeing them and getting ideas. And so this painting, I drew it. It was a little different when I first drew it. I'm doing it, and I have no intention of putting it on the cover of the book. It has nothing to do with the book. It's like in my little downstairs studio over here, I'm doing the painting, and over here I'm on my laptop, and in a mysterious way they started to fuse. Mm-hmm. I'm almost finished with the book. There are 12 stories, one for every month of the year, and I've done 11 of them. And now it's time to do number 12. And I know by now that number 12 has to tie them all in together, because I've already decided that it's a novel and they're all connected, and so it has to all come together in story number 12. So and I had no idea, and while I'm thinking about that, I keep looking over at the painting. And now you will, when you read the book, you'll see that story number 12 is the story of how this painting came about and what it means. So I didn't do the story, I didn't do the painting to match the story, I did the story to match the painting. I had no idea that story number 12 would have anything to do with a painting or a painter. But when you read it, you'll see that story number 12 tells you everything you need to know about the painting. And I say that you see 6 skulls, they mean something. You'll find out in story number 12, why are there 6 skulls? You have 4 wailing women, suffering, wailing. Why? You have this person here on a train leaving this scene of grief and suffering. And you have Buddha back here laughing at the whole scene. What's he laughing about? You have Abfahrt. That's a German word for departure. So if you're in a train station in Germany and you want to know departure and arrival, and you look up, you'll see Abfahrt. That's departure. The name of the painting is When the Train Leaves the Station. The train is leaving the station and this guy's going with it. He's leaving it all behind. The name of the story is When the Train Leaves the Station. To really know what all that means, you have to read all 11 stories first to get to the number 12 and see how it all gets tied together in a mysterious and implausible way, and hopefully satisfactory way.
I think so. Well, again, that way that you weave different planes of reality in this book, several stories. I mean, there are characters who appear in different stories inexplicably. It's like, what are you doing in this story? So I think that's just
Gate
one of,
crashing.
was that?
Gate crashing.
Gate crashing. There's a lot of gate crashing in here in different places. So I wanted to open it up to you and see what you want to ask Gene, or where you want to, what you want to know about his book, or about how he creates, or there's so much rich information about this process here, you know. Oh, okay. I'm going to put this mic on so everyone can be heard now.
So, do you have some sense that these stories and these characters are different aspects of yourself that maybe reside in your subconscious?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Everything that you write comes from yourself. It's just like, it's like a dream. And you probably heard the dream theory that every character in your dream, the good ones, the demons, the evil ones, are aspects of yourself. Who else could they be? And so, every character in the story, and there are some pretty shady characters in there, and I have to admit that they are me, some aspect of me. So, yes.
I just want to say, I think that's part of the courage of a real artist, that you're willing to go out of yourself as you know yourself and say, this is all of me as well. The light, the dark, the fantasy, I mean, all of these things. So I really get that from your writing. I think in true art, there's a fearlessness that's there. So I see it in there.
Yeah, and you can kind of tell, some writing where you see that doesn't happen, and the people are just, it's superficial. If you ask why a person writes, an answer might be to see what I have to say, because you don't really know yourself. Life is just so busy and frivolous sometimes that to really go deep into it, which is what a writer can do, because he lives in a world of solitude most of the time, is to explore and examine himself and bring it out. And so it can be like embarrassing sometimes, but I think that's what everyone wants to do, is to be known, and not to just live with their quiet, dark self. They want it out there. So a writer puts it out there to know himself, but also so other people know him. And I go back to this quote by an author. I don't know which one it was. It might have been Flannery O'Connor or Joyce Carol Oates. It was a female genius author who was like socially inept, who hated dinner parties because people would want to talk to her. And her quote was, if you would know me, read my work, because that's where you'll find me. I'm in there. And if I can't, have a conversation about it, if you really care about what I think, read it, because all of me is in there. And that's why I spend these hours and years in isolation, digging it out and presenting it. So,
Okay.
yes.
I'm going to ask you a question then, because you are an author who spends a lot of time alone, and here you are, and you've got people, and you're talking.
What? I thought I invented these guys.
Well, you
Maybe
did.
You did.
But I'm curious, as an author who is used to that kind of safe space, I will call it, where it's just you and your thoughts and it's wild, and now you're with people and you're talking about being an author and an artist. Is there a difference between those two? Is there a boundary between the two? It seems like you're kind of going through that one tonight too. Kind of the curtains pulled back.
Well, I think a writer wants to reach out and communicate, and if there are any kind of boundaries, what more? Well, they would want to. Actually, I have to give you a lot of credit, because prior to this, we had spent a couple of sessions rehearsing, not rehearsing, scripting, but having this conversation, and Frank made me feel comfortable, and I just knew that, you know, wherever it goes, you know, he's going to carry it and see, and so.
Well, you stepped right in, you know? And that's the beauty of this. I mean, because I think we're experiencing something wonderful and rare in that we have an artist who most of the time is to himself in his own mind, his own imagination, playing in these different planes of existence and saying, here, you want to know something about me? Read this. I'm going to go away now. and, you know, but you're sitting here with people, and I think...
And the thing that struck me when
Yeah.
you first read the beginning,
Yes.
you pierced, I mean, it's the fourth wall, right
Yes.
off the dear reader. I mean, you're confronting that
Right.
relationship between the
Yep.
author and the audience
Yes.
right off the bat, and you're saying, here I am.
And you know, I'm glad you bring that up, because I'm going to read a little bit more from that was the prologue, and I'm going to read a little bit more from it, which speaks to that. The next part of the prologue talks about how now Adrian, the fictional author...
Before you go on, I just want you to have a moment to kind of take that in, what she just said. The author just came back. Do you want to say that again?
I couldn't.
Okay, you're right, I get it.
Yeah.
But
But I mean, it
Well, I was going to talk about Sam. I was going to...
okay, that's
it was
good.
gonna
But I
introduce
mean,
the
I just
concept
wanted
of
to
Sam.
pause because you're doing something very extraordinary right now. And you're letting us see more. And as she is saying, even the opening, you're saying, let's bust this thing open. I'm an author, but this is really the author here, and I'm talking to you, and that's the important part in the fourth wall. And so, yes, this is a good time to talk about Sam, because Sam is one of the three main characters.
Right.
There's Adrian.
Adrian, who you met, Adrian had the first weird event as a child, and then the guy in the Ronald McDonald suit that gets impaled on the telephone pole, and he changes his life. And then the next part of the prologue, he talks about Miranda, and you recall that Miranda was his stuffed monkey when he was growing up. And then it'll go on. I won't read the whole thing because it's fairly long. But he talks about how now that he is becoming an author and not a finance person, and he's grown, he's not a kid. However, he has retained Miranda as like a cherished childhood, like a blankie kind of thing. But one day Miranda became real. In a very real way, and manifested and materialized, and became his muse for the rest of his writing career. So now you have two characters. You have Adrian, the writer, and you have Miranda, his muse, who is ethereal and ephemeral. But you have a third character who appears in every story. And so I'm going to read it real quick.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one.
So we started out, dear reader, you should know up front whom you're dealing with, Adrian. Then he talks about Miranda and how she lingered and then she became manifested materially in a mystical way. And then he says, oh, and one more thing. We'll dispense with the dear reader device. Your name is Sam. I need to feel I'm addressing a real person, not a mass of anonymous readers out there somewhere. I hope you don't mind. I promise you won't lose your identity by sharing it with others. You'll remain a unique individual, just like everyone else. Besides, it's only for a year. Well, it's you and me and Miranda, Sam. Can we do this? And then immediately goes into the January story, and there's always a conversation between Sam, who is the reader. And so the entire book is a dialogue between the fictional author and the reader, and it brings it in. So
It's a beautiful device. I mean, because
That is wonderful.
isn't that? And we had to name you tonight too, because I said, well, the reader is one thing. Then there's the real people who show up. They're not exactly readers, they're going to be listeners, so who do we call them? And I think you came up with the name Joe, since we want to get gender neutral names. So it could be
Joseph
J-O-E
and
or
Joseph,
you know. So you become part of the story here tonight. And, you know, that's the brilliance, I think, of what he does, is that kind of, including, you break through all those walls, like I said, and we're just in the middle of some other plane, and we're not sure which one, and we're in it, but we're not, and maybe it's imagined, but maybe it's not, and all of it just kind of,
Well, in real life, we are all these people anyway.
Yeah.
You know, depending on how you wake up in the morning, or
yeah.
how you feel about yourself,
But I
or all
think,
the doubts that you have.
and we encounter each other all the time, and we don't know each other's stories, you see. And so this is, I think, really, one of the devices I like is it starts at the good bean, all the characters come through the good bean, right? All 12,
yeah, they aren't necessarily patrons of the good bean who come through, but he may imagine them while he's sitting there, and he may see somebody who acts as a prompt, and he starts
Yeah.
seeing the characteristics and goes, well, you know, maybe this guy, you know, has problems, and let's.
yeah.
But
Go ahead.
here's a paragraph that speaks
Yes.
to Sam. Most of the stories begin with Adrian addressing Sam. Sam, thank you for being here. It's March. I thought I would have a story by now. It's the 15th. Miranda has abandoned me. That capricious. You know, what am I going to do? But I have my methods, and we're going to come up with something. So they have this conversation most of the time. And here's one. Monday, April 1st, 2019. This is the April story. And Adrian says, he's sitting down. He says, I thought about you last night, Sam. I wondered who you are. Who and where and when. You and I share the miracle of writing, a miracle because it defies the laws of physics. I'm in Jacksonville, Oregon in April of 2019. You might be a retired psychotherapist in Jacksonville a year from now, a publisher of fiction in New York 4 years from now, or a climate scientist on the dark side of the moon in 50 years. But mysteriously, the moment I write these words, and the moment you read them are but a single moment. You and I exist now. Our minds have coalesced across the boundaries of time and space, and we are one and the same conscious entity. Pretty cool, huh? But enough of that, we have an April story to write. So what that's saying is, you know, it goes on with the three characters in the dialogue with Sam, but it also,
Time works.
yeah, and it refers to one of the themes of the entire book that, well, there are so many quantum physics and transmigration of souls and all this stuff that gets thrown in there like a potpourri. But I just like that
It's a
paragraph.
beautiful paragraph, because that's it. You're talking directly to your reader. You're sharing something, and that concept that we don't know at what point, past, present. You could be, I'm writing this now, you're reading it, maybe it is the same time. I mean, these are these wonderful, profound questions about reality that you artfully work throughout this book. And I think that's part of the beauty of the book, is that you're talking about very profound kinds of philosophical questions, and you do it in a way that's Playful not because it's fun, playful because you are playing in all of these questions. You know, you just kind of you romp through there and we go through it with you. And so you come away, because now when I go to the Good Bean, it's not the same, right?
Spoiled it forever.
It's true, because you say, well, you look at people and think, I wonder if that's who he was writing about, or I wonder if. And I think one of the great gifts of your book, and why it's a gift being a local author, is because you're taking something familiar to us and allowing us to look at it in an unfamiliar way. And I think that's a lot of what great art is. You know, you take us on a journey somewhere. We have the starting point, like I said in the opening, but we don't know where we're going to go. And that's why I think understanding magical realism helps a reader to say, I get it. I'm not going to resist this ride. I'm not going to say, did that really happen? Are you sure? You don't care. And you just enjoy the ride. And I think that's just one of the most beautiful things about your writing. You let us play in that and have to sit there and go, you can't scratch your head. You'll just get bald, you know, because you have to just go with this whole thing. And once you do that, you're helping all of us loosen our boundaries about what's real, about other people.
Right.
Are we other people? You know, where is this really happening? And I think that you open that up, and I love that it's set here in Jacksonville and at the Good Bean. And I can picture when you talk about, you watch people doing Bible studies, like I've seen that group. He has a whole story about that, about who is this person who is leading one
How
of
about
these
if I
groups.
read just that one little paragraph, the short introduction to the story that you're referring to?
Good.
And that story was, what was that story? It was, born again, 100-fold.
I love that story.
Okay, and
yeah.
this is fictional author Adrian talking to Sam as a preface to the September story. And he says, which is about, controversial stuff about,
Good. Read.
he says, Sam, I don't have a clue about your religious affiliations.
This is a beautiful term.
I don't know to what great book you might go for insight into the spiritual realm of existence. The Tao Te Ching of Taoism, the Talmud of Judaism, the Agamas of Jainism, the Koran of Islam, the Upanishads of Hinduism, the Tipitaka of Buddhism, the Christian Bible, or to the myriad insightful explorations of the spiritual world by non-affiliated gurus throughout the ages. But I suspect if you're still with me, you do spend a considerable part of your time seeking the truth, and know by now that the truth is where you find it.
I love that paragraph.
That's great.
And that's an introduction to
Don't give it away.
okay.
You can. Say what.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And
I
we
don't
don't know
wanna
who
stop
we're talking to here.
you. Well, it's just introduction to who is one of the pastors, and he makes up a story, a background story. It doesn't take you where you think you would go, but that's what I love about it. You start with something familiar, and you go into the unfamiliar. I think I hope we've gotten a sense of what this book and how this man thinks and how he writes. He's a real gift here. What else would you like to say to him? Ask him.
Did you say you've read it?
Yes.
Well, I'm saying I gotta go home with one tonight.
Yeah, it really is a wonderful trip.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
believe in the planes of existence, and I just, it just touched me, because it can just let me expand.
Oh, wow. Communal souls.
Communal souls.
Yeah.
That's very much your theme in here. Ken.
Yeah, what struck me is that what you've done is you've taken a very dry term we know as quantum physics,
Yeah.
and you've given a right brain interpretation,
Yeah.
an example of what they're really talking about with quantum physics.
The implications.
The implications of what is past, present, and future, what is now, what is next, alternate realities within the same space, and what is reality and what is imagination, you know, and because that's what the first clue that I got when I read the book was that story about Adrian, you know, getting in his first bedroom as a young boy, and his older self appears and has a little bit of time with him and says everything is great and so on. And then you're having Adrian, who's 25 years old, dreaming of the boy in the bed with his monkey. So it's just like, wait a minute, you know, and that's what quantum physics tries to say, that there's the membrane between reality, one reality and the next reality is paper thin.
Yes.
That's a great way to say it. It is giving us a sense of quantum. Because I think about Jacksonville, I call it at times the Jacksonville effect. Have you all experienced it? You're thinking of someone or think of something, and then within a very short amount of time, you see that person, or you have a need, and that someone says, "I have this for you." How did that happen? How did we shortcut this thing between thought and reality?
Well, Facebook does it.
Facebook. Oh, there's that too.
Algorithms.
Algorithm. That's true. But there's something that I experience more here than I have in other places, where it seems like there's something afoot, that we kind of share some kind of mind together, that there's something about maybe the small community, whatever it is, but even more than just the geographic size, or the size and so forth, and proximity to people and running into them. There's something at play here. And that's part of why I was so intrigued by your book, because it kind of illustrates and tells stories about the thing that a lot of us experience here.
The veil is very thin.
Yes, that's exactly it. The veil is thin. And that's why I felt so at home in this book. He stretches it though. You stretch us, and it's an adventure. But I think it's a wonderful stretching. And I'm so grateful to you, Gene, that you write this, you tell us how you write it, and your dedication. You go to the Good Bean at 6 o'clock. I mean, this kind of just.
Well,
He did.
yes and no.
Is that fiction?
Well, no. What is not true is that it occurred in 1 year. It took 2 years to write. So I did go in every morning at 6 o'clock in the morning, 6 to 12, unless something else came up, for 2 years. And that's where I wrote the entire thing. Sometimes I would also do some revision in the evening at home of what I did the morning, but that's where I wrote it. And again, it was never intended to be anything about Good Bean. It was just a convenient place where I could work, and my wife could be at home with the dog and do her own thing, and we wouldn't interfere with each other's stuff, and so it was just convenient, and that's why I went to the Good Bean. It was never intended to be anything about the Good Bean, but being there, how things suffuse into and become, and so it became a book not about the Good Bean, but about how this fictional author wrote a book at the Good Bean. Yeah.
Well, you put yourself in a place to open yourself up to serendipity, and
Yes.
when you allow serendipity to be in your life, it's amazing how she comes along.
Well, that's right. Yeah, and that's been said a few different ways. Ask and you shall be done.
And
Yeah.
that's what you say. That's
Tell the
every
universe what you want, and it will start
Every
delivering.
story in the book is that. Ken, you had a final?
Yeah, I've never read anything in which I was so familiar
Yeah.
with the environment. I mean, I know everything you talked about that had to.
And other cities as well, with San Francisco or.
Yeah, and so on, and I felt, I don't even know how to describe it, like privileged or excited, because what he was saying about those things that I'm so familiar with in this town and other locations was how he was giving me a whole broader view of everything, I don't know how to describe it.
Yeah,
but
you
it was
get to
just
see the
so-
place you're familiar with in unfamiliar ways. And also that you say in the book to other people, people end up in Jacksonville for different reasons, but as you say, I forget who said it in one of the stories, but that this place is filled with authors and artists and creative people. We just kind of gather here. And I love your story. We can't go into it. Wanted to be somebody else and trying to lose your identity.
Well, becoming nobody.
Becoming nobody is a great story. And it kind of feeds into how a lot of us got to Jacksonville. That we left behind a person that we were, and we became the person we were meant to become by coming here, and we recognized one another somehow. There's just so much of that. And anyway, I'm so grateful to you for the openness that you've had with your own self to all of who you are, all of your experience, and taking time to learn the craft of writing so well, so that you're able to download all of this and put it into a form as readers, as Sam's out here and Joe's, that we can take it in. And it's another reason I'm so grateful to live here, because a local author who's doing something that's huge, I think, for the world.
Well, I can look out at these 6 people and go, you're why I live here.
It's true.
No, really, it's like, how many people are in Jacksonville? 2,800?
Yeah.
I bet there are more artists and entrepreneurs per capita in Jacksonville than in San Francisco or New York or LA per capita.
Yeah.
They're everywhere.
And here we are.
It's the only way you can survive in Southern Oregon is do your own gig, right?
That's right. Yeah, and music. There's a story in here about the origin of prodigies called 10,000 Hours in Shadowland, and it's all about music and the music you find in the valley.
I want to close with this. This painting is here. I came in tonight and Jean said, "Oh, you have the same color, as this." And I had thought, once you get going, I know we're going to all fall into this multi-plane. You call it the multiverse, not the universe, but multiverse. And so I was going to check at the end of the evening to see if I ended up in the painting by the time this is over. So I'm going to kind of look in there, and it could be that I have
Tomorrow.
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 Kind of how it works. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well, thank you.
You'll all be in there tomorrow.
I believe it.
We're all going to be there. So Paula and Arliss, thank you for creating this wonderful opportunity for someone like Jean to come and share this brilliant work and for us to participate. Yeah, I think you really created the experience of what your book is about with all of us who are here in this room tonight, because we're all taking part in this together. Works, So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.